Most trains just connect cities. This one quietly connects some of the most important places in American history, with some of the wildest water and wildlife in the country. If all you've ever heard about is Amtrak to the big western parks, this episode is the East Coast answer to that. We're going to ride one overnight train, the Silver Meteor, from the Northeast all the way to Miami, and treat it like a spine you can hang national park units and sites on along the way. Instead of just New York to Florida as a straight shot, we're going to break it into modules. First, you've got a history-heavy stop in Philadelphia, where you can step off the train and walk straight into Independence National Historical Park, Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, and the streets where the whole American experiment started. Then, you've got Washington, D.C., where Union Station drops you within a quick metro ride of the National Mall, the major memorials, and even a taste of C&O Canal National Historical Park. And at the far end of the line, Miami turns from beach city into your launch pad for actual national parks. Biscayne's reefs and islands, the airboats and boardwalks of Everglades. And, if you want to push it, the seaplanes and ferries that reach out to Dry Tortugas at the edge of the Gulf. By the end of this episode, you'll see how one train ticket can link all of that together, without ever renting a car if you don't want to. In this first segment, I'll lay out what the Silver Meteor actually is, how long it takes, and why it's such a good backbone for this kind of trip. Then, in the next segments, we'll zoom into each stop, Philly, D.C., and finally Miami and the parks at the end of the tracks. The Silver Meteor is Amtrak's classic East Coast overnight train that runs between New York and Miami. It's not as long or remote as the big western routes, but it quietly does something just as interesting. It strings together the Northeast corridor cities you already know with the low country marshes, pine forests and palms that tell you you're getting close to Florida. On paper, it's about a 28-hour trip end to end. In practice, what that means for you is one night on the train instead of two. You board in the afternoon or evening up north, ride through the busy Northeast corridor with its bridges and city skylines, fall asleep somewhere in the Carolinas, and wake up rolling through flat, sun-washed landscapes on your way into Florida. On board, you've got the usual long-distance options. Coach seats if you're watching the budget. Roomettes and bedrooms if you want a door and a bed and a cafe or dining car depending on what class you're in. It's not a luxury train, but it's comfortable enough that the overnight segment becomes part of the trip, not just a long commute. If you've already watched my other Trains to the Parks episodes, think of this as the shorter, coastal cousin, less mountain drama out the window, but way more chances to hop off in big cities and swap skyscrapers for national sites. For this episode, we're going to treat the Silver Meteor less like a straight New York to Miami train and more like a modular route. You can ride it all the way through if you want, but you can also break it into chunks. A segment that ends in Philadelphia, a segment that ends in D.C., and the long overnight segment that delivers you into Miami for the parks at the end of the line. In the next segment, we'll zoom into the first of those modules. How to step off in Philadelphia and turn Independence National Historical Site into your first train to the park stop on this route. On this route, Philadelphia is my first real train to the parks module, and I'm not going to pretend you can do it justice in a rush 2-hour layover. Southbound, the Silver Meteor usually rolls into Philly in the late afternoon, which is honestly too late to squeeze an Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell before closing. So instead of sprinting, we're going to treat Philadelphia as a proper overnight stop. Here's the idea. You ride the Silver Meteor down from the Northeast and step off at 30th Street Station, this big classic terminal that feels straight out of the golden age of rail. From there, you don't need a car. You just grab a quick rideshare or hop on local transit and head over to the historic district near Independence Hall. That first evening is all about getting your bearings. Check into a hotel within walking distance, grab some dinner, and then go for a twilight walk. Even if the buildings are closed, you can still wander the plazas, see Independence Hall lit up at night, and get a feel for the fact that this is an actual national park unit you can explore entirely on foot. The real park day starts the next morning. You wake up already in the historic district and walk over to the visitor center when it opens. That's your launch point for everything, picking up any timed entry you might need, getting a quick orientation, and then heading out on a simple walking loop. You hit the Liberty Bell, tour Independence Hall, and then fan out into the surrounding streets and squares. For this series, The point I want to drive home is that this absolutely counts as a national park by train experience. You arrived on a long-distance train, you never rented a car, and you're spending your day in an official national historical site that fits into a few very walkable blocks. Now, here's the fine print you need to know before you copy this. When you step off in Philadelphia and let your Silver Meteor train go, that original ticket is done. To keep heading south, you're going to book a second ticket from Philly to Washington, D.C. Usually on a Northeast Regional, leaving in the late afternoon or evening. There's no free stopover built into a long-distance ticket. Every time you add a city module like this, you're stitching the trip together with multiple reservations. The upside is that this buys you a relaxed stay instead of a rushed one. You can spend the morning and early afternoon inside the park, walk around Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, grab an early dinner nearby, and then head back to 30th Street Station for your evening train to D.C. By the time you pull into Washington, it'll be later in the evening, which is perfect. You just head straight to your hotel and wake up the next morning already based in the nation's capital, ready to turn the National Mall and the monuments into your next train to the park stop. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of this Philly stop, because this is where a good idea either works smoothly or turns into a headache. First, distance. Amtrak's 30th Street Station is not right next to Independence Hall, but it's not crazy far either. You're about 2 miles away, which is roughly a 40-minute walk if you really want to hoof it, or about 10 minutes on the subway or a quick rideshare across town. The easiest transit move is to take the local subway from 30th Street over to the 5th Street, Independence Hall stop, which drops you almost right at the Visitor Center and the Liberty Bell area. Next, what do you do with your luggage? You've really got two strategies here. If you're doing this as a proper overnight, my recommendation is to take your bags with you to a hotel near the historic district. Check in, drop everything in the room, and then you're free to walk to all the park sites without thinking about lockers or storage. It also means that the next morning, you can just step out the door and be in the park in a couple of minutes instead of commuting back and forth from the station. If you just don't want to carry bags into the historic core, there are third-party luggage storage services around 30th Street Station. Think of them as off-site lockers run by nearby shops or hotels. You book a slot, drop your bags near the station, go into town with just a day pack, and then pick everything up on your way back for your next train. Now, hours and closing times. As a rough rule of thumb, most of the Independence National Historical Park core sites run something like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. outside of peak summer. That means your sweet spot for serious sightseeing is basically late morning through mid-afternoon. After that, you're mostly in evening stroll and exterior shots mode. For this trip, I'd plan it like this. Day 1, you arrive late. Go straight to your hotel near the historic district, and just enjoy an easy evening walk. Day 2 is your proper park day. Start at the Visitor Center when it opens. Work your way through the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall while they're fully open. And then aim to be wrapping up by mid-afternoon so you have time to eat and still get back to 30th Street Station for your evening train to DC. If you keep those distances, storage options, and closing times in mind, Philly becomes a really clean, low-stress train to the parks overnight instead of a rushed box-checking exercise. Once you've had your full day at Independence National Historical Park, it's time to get back on the rails and head for Washington, D.C. Out of Philadelphia, you've got 3 main options to reach D.C. The Northeast Regional, Acela, and the long-distance Silver Meteor or Silver Star. For this kind of trip, the Northeast Regional is usually the sweet spot. It runs frequently, it's more affordable than Acela, and it gets you from 30th Street Station to Washington Union Station in roughly 2 hours. If you're really pressed for time and don't mind paying extra, Acela is the faster business-style option. It saves a little time. But for a leisure trains to the parks trip, most people would rather keep that money for hotels, food, or tours once they get to DC and Miami. You might be wondering, should I stick with the Silver Meteor for this leg so the whole trip is on the same train? Technically, yes, you can ride or re-board the Meteor between Philly and DC, but it doesn't really buy you anything here. It only comes through once a day, and because it's a long-distance train, it's more vulnerable to delays rolling in from way up the line. For this short hop, it makes more sense to think of the Silver Meteor as the headline route, and use the Northeast Regional as the workhorse that actually connects your Philly and DC modules. The other big question is when to book. These corridor tickets work on dynamic pricing, which is a fancy way of saying the cheap seats usually disappear first. Once you know which evening you want to leave Philadelphia, don't wait around for a deal that may never come. Go ahead and lock in that regional ticket in advance, so you're not stuck choosing between an expensive last-minute fare or a bad departure time. So on this leg, the pattern looks like this. Ride the Silver Meteor into Philly. Break your journey for an overnight in the historic district. Then use a pre-booked Northeast Regional the next evening to glide down to Washington, D.C. in about 2 hours. That keeps your story anchored on the Silver Meteor, but uses the busy Northeast Corridor schedule to make the logistics smooth and flexible. Now that we've built Philly in as a proper overnight, the next move is getting yourself lined up for Washington, D.C. Before you do anything else, I want you to check the status of whatever train you're planning to take out of Philadelphia. Long-distance trains and even corridor trains can run late, and that can actually change what your day looks like. If your evening departure is running on time, great. You can stick with a relaxed park day, have an early dinner near Independence Hall, and then head back to 30th Street Station with plenty of buffer. If, on the other hand, the app or the departure board is already showing a big delay, that can be a hidden bonus. A late-running train might buy you enough extra time to squeeze in one more site, maybe a quick museum, another historic square, or just a slower, more detailed lap around the park. The key is to decide early, is this a head back to the station now situation, or do you have an extra hour or two to play with? Either way, you're not improvising at the last second. You've already got your second ticket from Philly to DC booked. You're watching that departure like a hawk, and you've got a mental plan A and plan B. Plan A is train on time, easy walk back to the station, and a smooth evening ride down to Washington. Plan B is train delayed, one more site or one more hour in the park, and then a slightly later arrival into DC. In the next segment, we're going to pick the story up on the other end of that ride, stepping off in Washington, D.C. and turning the National Mall and the monuments into your next train to the park's module. Washington, D.C. is where this route really explodes with options, so let's keep it simple and realistic. First, let's talk time. Yes, you can sprint through DC in one very packed day. But if you actually want this to feel like a trains to the park stop and not a punishment march, I'd budget 2 full days here. One day focused on the National Mall and the big memorials, and a second day that mixes a couple of Smithsonian museums with a slower walk or even a quick taste of C&O Canal National Historical Park over in Georgetown. Logistics are actually on your side in DC. You arrive at Washington Union Station, and from there you're roughly a mile or less to the nearest edge of the National Mall. For a lot of travelers, that's an easy 15 to 20-minute walk. If you don't feel like dragging a suitcase, you can hop on Metro right from the station or use one of the buses that loop around the mall and the museums. For where to stay, think about your luggage and your feet. Option 1 is a hotel near Union Station. You step off the train, roll your bag a few blocks, check in, and you're done, no extra transfers. Option 2 is staying closer to the mall itself, which cuts down your daily walking when you're bouncing between museums, the Washington Monument, and the Lincoln Memorial. Either way, I'd plan on taking your bag straight to the hotel and treating DC as a normal city base, not trying to live out of the station. The good news is that the mall and the memorials are incredibly forgiving on hours. The green space itself and the big memorials are essentially open 24 hours a day. And they're some of the best places in the country to see early morning or after dark when everything is lit, and the crowds thin out. The museums along the mall are more traditional, figure on roughly 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. for most of the big Smithsonian buildings, with timed entry reservations needed during busy seasons. So here's how I'd build it into the trip. Night 1, you roll down from Philadelphia, step off at Union Station, and check into a hotel near the station or the mall. Maybe you do a quick nighttime walk just to see the Capitol Dome or one memorial lit up. Day 1 is all about monuments and memorials. Lincoln, World War II, Vietnam, MLK, whatever hits your list. Day 2 is museums and a slower pace, maybe air and space, American history, or natural history. Plus a little extra time to wander further out toward the canal if you want that National Historical Park angle. By the end of those 2 days, you've turned DC into a dense city center national sites module on the same trip. And you're back at Union Station in the evening, ready to reconnect with the Silver Meteor and keep rolling south toward Miami and the Florida National Parks at the end of the line. Once you've had your 2 full days in DC, it's time to reconnect with the Silver Meteor and start the long run south. This is another spot where I want you to live in the Amtrak app for a minute. Pull up the Silver Meteor and check the live status of the southbound train out of Washington, D.C. On the timetable, it's scheduled to leave Union Station in the early evening, around 7:30, but long-distance trains can drift, so don't just assume it's on time. If it's tracking close to schedule, that's your cue to start wrapping up your day on the mall. Finish your last museum, grab dinner, and give yourself plenty of buffer to walk or metro back to Union Station. Find your platform and board without rushing. If the app is showing a big delay, that can actually be good news. You've just bought yourself extra sunset time at the monuments or a slower, more relaxed dinner before you head back. Either way, you're making that decision with real-time info, not guesswork. And once you step onto the Silver Meteor and it rolls out of Union Station in the evening, that's the moment this trip flips from corridors and city stops into a true overnight long-distance ride through Virginia and the Carolinas overnight, with Florida and the Miami area national parks waiting for you at the far end of the line. Once the Silver Meteor pulls out of Washington, D.C. in the evening, the whole feel of the trip changes. You've spent the first part of this journey hopping between dense, walkable national sites in big cities, Independence National Historical Park in Philly, the mall and memorials in D.C., and now you're finally settling into a true overnight long-distance run. As the train glides out of Union Station, you get a last glimpse of the Capitol Dome, and then you're rolling through Virginia and the Carolinas while the sky goes dark. On board, this is your chance to reset. Grab dinner in the cafe or dining car. Stake out a spot by the window for a little bit of twilight scenery, and then lean into the sleeper train rhythm. Make your bunk, plug in your devices, and let the rocking of the train do its thing. By treating DC as your last big city module, you've earned this quiet stretch. No more packing in monuments and museums, just time to rest while the miles slide past overnight. By the time you wake up, you're deep in the southeast. The landscape outside has flattened out, the trees have changed, and the station names are starting to sound more and more like Florida. This is where the end-of-the-line concept really kicks in. Instead of just thinking train to Miami, you're thinking, I'm on a moving base camp that's delivering me to a cluster of national parks at the very bottom of the map. In the next segment, we'll talk about what that looks like on the ground, using Miami as your base for Biscayne, Everglades, and, if you want to go all in, even Dry Tortugas as a bonus national park at the far edge of the Keys. When you ride the Silver Meteor all the way to the end of the line, the schedule has you rolling into Miami in the late afternoon, typically around 6 to 7 p.m., if everything's running close to on time. That arrival time really shapes how you use your first day. You're not stepping off the train and going straight to a national park. You're stepping off, getting through the station, and heading into the city right as the light is getting good and people are thinking about dinner. So I like to treat arrival day as a soft landing. Check into your hotel, get your bearings, maybe grab a quick evening walk along the waterfront, and let your body catch up after the overnight run. From here maybe comes your base camp. You're not relying on tiny towns and rental cars the way you might on some western routes. You've got one big, well-connected city with tours, boats, and buses that fan out to multiple national parks and then bring you right back to your hotel at night. At a high level, you can think of the Miami section as 3 modules. First, Biscayne National Park, almost all water with islands, reefs, and mangroves that you reach by boat from just south of the city. Second, Everglades National Park, where you trade skylines for sawgrass, boardwalks, and alligators, usually via day tours or park shuttles from the Miami area. And third, a level 3 option. If you want to go all in and add one more park to the list, you can push on to Key West and use ferries or seaplanes to reach Dry Tortugas National Park way out at the edge of the Gulf. You don't have to do all of them to make this trip worth it. You might use that late afternoon arrival day just to settle in, then spend one full day in Biscayne and one full day in the Everglades and call it good. Or if you're the kind of person who likes to collect park stamps, You can stack Biscayne, Everglades, and Dry Tortugas into a full week of train plus water-based national parks. In the next segment, we'll zoom in on the logistics, where to base yourself in Miami, how many nights to budget, and exactly how you get from that late-day Silver Meteor arrival to boats, boardwalks, and wide-open Everglades views without renting a car for your whole stay. Now let's talk about how to actually use Miami as your base, because where you sleep will make or break how easy these park days feel. For this kind of trip, I plan on 3 to 5 nights in Miami. Night 1 is just your arrival night after that late afternoon Silver Meteor roll-in. Then you've got at least 2, ideally 3 full days you can plug park modules into. 1 day for Biscayne, 1 day for Everglades, and a flex day you can use either for rest, for exploring Miami itself, or for pushing farther out toward the Keys if you're chasing Dry Tortugas. When you're picking a hotel, you've got 2 main strategies. Option 1 is to base yourself in or near downtown Miami or Brickell. That keeps you reasonably close to the train station, to Metrorail, and to a lot of the tour pickup points for Biscayne and Everglades. It's not a classic beach vacation, but it's very practical for early morning departures and stumbling back tired at the end of a hot, humid park day. Option 2 is to stay out toward Miami Beach and treat the parks as full-day excursions from a more resort-style base. That's great if you want ocean views and beach walks in the evenings, but you'll need to be honest about the extra time and cost of getting back over to the mainland for those early tour check-ins. The nice thing about this end-of-the-line setup is that, unlike some of the western routes, you don't automatically need a rental car. Most visitors can reach Biscayne and Everglades through organized day tours, park shuttles, or boat operators that include transportation from Miami or nearby suburbs. So when you're hotel shopping, don't just look at the pool. Check whether the tours you're eyeing pick up in that neighborhood, or whether you'll be paying for long ride shares at 6 in the morning. So the rhythm here is simple. Late day train arrival and an easy first night, then 2 or 3 full days where you're out on the water or in the wetlands, and evenings back in the same room, editing footage and drying out your gear. In the next segment, we'll zoom in on the first of those days and turn Biscayne into your train plus boat national park module off the very end of the Silver Meteor. Let's start with Biscayne National Park, because this is the stop that really flips the script on what a train to the parks trip looks like. Everywhere else in this series, you step off a train and head for rocks, canyons, dunes, or forests. Biscayne is the opposite. This park is almost entirely water, reefs, islands, and mangroves just south of Miami. You're not driving up to a big entrance sign and hiking a loop trail. You're heading out by boat. Here's how I'd build it into the trip. From your base in Miami, you're up early and heading south to meet a tour or boat operator near the park. Most visitors don't need a rental car for this. You're looking for a day tour that includes transportation, or you take a simple rideshare down to the marina where the boat leaves. Once you're there, your entire park day is built around the water. Snorkeling over coral reefs if conditions are good, glass-bottom boat rides if you want to stay dry, or island cruises that weave through the Keys and mangrove channels. The key takeaway I want you to hear is that this is absolutely doable as an add-on to a long-distance train trip. You ride the Silver Meteor all the way to Miami, you base yourself in the city, and then you use one organized day on the water to turn that rail trip into a genuine national park experience. No week-long car rental, no complex backroad navigation, just an early alarm, a shuttle or rideshare, and a full day in a park most people only ever see on a map. So when you're planning this route, think of Biscayne as your first big Miami module. 1 full day, built around a single boat trip, that takes your train to the park's adventure off the tracks and out onto the water. Next up is Everglades National Park, which becomes your second big Miami area park day. If Biscayne is all about water and reefs, Everglades is about wide-open wetlands, boardwalks, and wildlife. From Miami, you're usually not driving yourself deep into the park. Instead, you're booking a day tour or park shuttle that takes you out toward one of the main entrances, like Shark Valley or the Homestead side, and then brings you back to the city at the end of the day. For most people, this works best as a full-day commitment. You're up early, you meet your tour or shuttle, and you spend the middle of the day out in the heat and humidity, walking short boardwalks, riding a tram or airboat if that's your thing, and keeping your eyes open for alligators, birds, and that endless sawgrass horizon. It's not a hardcore hiking destination for this kind of trip. It's more about short walks, overlooks, and making sure you're drinking water and protecting yourself from the sun and bugs. The important point for this series is that, just like Biscayne, you can do Everglades without renting a car for the whole week. You arrive in Miami by train, you base yourself in the city, and then you use one organized day to get out to the park and back. That keeps the logistics simple and stays true to the idea that the Silver Meteor is your spine, and the parks are modules you plug onto the end of the line. So when you zoom out, your Miami plan now has 2 solid national park days. One on the water in Biscayne and one out in the wetlands in Everglades. In the next segment, we'll talk about how, if you want to go even further, you can add Dry Tortugas National Park as a bonus Level 3 extension to the same train-based trip. Let's get specific about what it actually takes to add Dry Tortugas onto this trip. From Miami, the first step is getting down to Key West. The drive along the overseas highway is about 160 miles and usually takes around 3.5 to 4 hours each way, depending on traffic and how many times you stop. If you don't want to drive, there are bus and shuttle options that take a similar amount of time. They're slower than flying, but they save you from renting a car. Because of that travel time, I'd plan to overnight in Key West before your Dry Tortugas day. Think of it like this: Day 1, travel from Miami to Key West and check into a hotel. Day 2, do your Dry Tortugas trip. Day 3, travel back to Miami. Once you're in Key West, you've got 2 main ways to reach Dry Tortugas: the ferry and the seaplane. For 2025, the ferry is typically in the ballpark of a little over $200 per adult for a day trip, and the seaplane is roughly $300 and up for a half day and well over $500 for a full day. Prices move around, but those are good reference points so you're not shocked when you start planning. In all cases, you should assume this needs to be booked well in advance. Both the boat and the plane sell out in busy seasons. The ferry is a full-day commitment. You're usually checking in around 7 in the morning, leaving Key West around 8, arriving at Dry Tortugas late morning, and then heading back mid-afternoon to reach Key West in the early evening. The seaplane is faster. A half day gives you a few hours on the island and cuts the travel time, but it costs more. Do you need a rental car for this? Not necessarily. If you're happy sitting on a shuttle or bus for 4 hours each way between Miami and Key West, you can pair that with walking and short local rides in Key West to reach the ferry or seaplane docks. A car does give you more flexibility to stop along the Keys, but it's not mandatory just to reach Dry Tortugas. This is a serious Level 3 add-on. Expect roughly 4 hours each way between Miami and Key West. Expect to spend in the low to mid hundreds of dollars per person for the ferry or significantly more for the seaplane. Expect to book ahead, and expect to spend at least one night in Key West. Now let's talk about Dry Tortugas National Park, because this is the optional extra that turns a great trip into a "did you really do all that by train?" story. Dry Tortugas sits way out past Key West, out in the Gulf of Mexico, and you only reach it by ferry or seaplane. For our purposes, this is a Level 3 module. You don't need it to make the Silver Meteor trip worth doing. But if you're a national park collector and you've already come this far, it's an incredible bonus. Here's how it fits into the plan. From Miami, you continue down to Key West, usually by bus, shuttle, or rental car. Then you use one full day for Dry Tortugas itself. You're up early again, you board either the park ferry or a seaplane. And you spend your day out at the fort and the surrounding beaches and water before coming back to Key West in the late afternoon. It adds cost, it adds time, and it adds another very early morning to a trip that already has a lot going on. But if you want to say, I took a train to Miami and Everglades and Dry Tortugas in one loop, this is how you do it. So when you zoom out, your Florida end of the line picture looks like this. The Silver Meteor delivers you to Miami, Biscayne, and Everglades, give you 2 solid national park days without a rental car. And Dry Tortugas is the optional third park you can layer on from Key West, if you want to push this itinerary all the way to the edge of the map. Now that we've stacked Philly, DC, Miami, Biscayne, Everglades, and maybe even Dry Tortugas, let's pull back and look at what this whole trip actually looks like as an itinerary. If you're doing the full version, you're looking at roughly 10 to 14 days. That gives you time for the overnight into Philadelphia, a proper park day there, 2 full days in Washington, D.C., the overnight run to Miami, 2 or 3 park days around Miami, and an optional 2 or 3 day add-on for Key West and Dry Tortugas. You can compress it, but if you want it to feel like a trip and not a checklist, that's the ballpark. The structure is simple. You start in the Northeast, ride the Silver Meteor down to Philadelphia, and break the trip for an overnight so you can actually enjoy Independence National Historical Park. Then you stitch things back together with a separate ticket into Washington, D.C., and give yourself 2 days to do the mall, the memorials, and a couple of museums. After that, you reconnect with the Silver Meteor in the evening, settle into the overnight, and wake up rolling toward Florida. Miami is where the train part ends and the park hub begins. You use the city as a base. 1 full day on the water in Biscayne, 1 full day in the wetlands in Everglades. And, if you want to go all in, a side trip down to Key West for a very early morning ferry or seaplane out to Dry Tortugas. Then you work your way back to Miami and either ride the train north again or fly home from there. This is one of those trips that can look wildly different depending on how you build it. The train side could be anything from a few $100s in coach if you book early and travel off-peak, to 4 figures if you start adding sleepers and booking closer in. City hotels in Philly, D.C., Miami, and Key West are likely to be your biggest line item. Park days in Biscayne and Everglades are mostly the cost of day tours and food, while Dry Tortugas is a high-commitment module in both time and money. This is not a dirt-cheap backpacking trip, but you can scale it. If you're on a tighter budget, focus on coach on the train, fewer nights in each city, and just Biscayne and Everglades out of Miami. If you've got more to spend, add sleepers, extra hotel nights, more museum time in DC, and Dry Tortugas at the end. Either way, the framework is the same. The Silver Meteor gets you down the coast, and you decide how many modules to clip onto it based on your time and your budget. In the final segment, we'll talk about who this trip is really for and how it fits alongside the other trains to the park's routes in this series. This is where we tie the whole thing together and figure out whether this trip belongs on your list. If you've watched my other Trains to the Parks episodes, you know the pattern by now. The California Zephyr is all about big mountain scenery and desert canyons. The Southwest Chief is about stitching together Western icons, like the Grand Canyon and Petrified Forest. The Lakeshore Limited is about sneaking national parks into a classic Midwest to East Coast route. The Silver Meteor is different. It's not trying to wow you with one huge landscape right next to the tracks. Instead, it quietly links together history, monuments, and water-based parks that you reach by building smart stopovers and basing yourself in the right cities. It's for people who like the idea of riding a classic East Coast train but don't want it to be just a way to get to Florida. It's for national park fans who are willing to trade one giant western panorama for a mix of Independence Hall, the Lincoln Memorial, coral reefs, and Everglades wetlands. And it's for planners, the folks who enjoy breaking a trip into modules and stitching them together. Philly as an overnight history stop, DC as a 2-day monument and museum module, Miami as a base camp for Biscayne and Everglades, and maybe the Keys as a high-commitment bonus at the end. If that sounds like you, the Silver Meteor gives you a way to turn a simple New York to Miami train ride into a multi-stop national parks itinerary without spending your whole vacation behind the wheel of a rental car. You ride one overnight train down the coast. You clip on as many city and park modules as your time and budget allow. And you step off at the end with a story that isn't just, we went to Florida. It's, we took a train to multiple national parks and national sites along the way. If you found this helpful and you want more ideas like this, check out the other routes in the series and let me know in the comments which one you'd build next. Another East Coast trip, a Western classic, or something completely different.